Raised by Wolves is one of those shows that's undeniably memorable despite its issues. This one is on the cusp of being one of the best sci-fi series on TV, but time and again the writing lets this show down from becoming more endearing. Don't get me wrong, Raised by Wolves has its merits, boasting an unrivaled moody atmosphere, intriguing ideas and a lot of unpredictability. Only, that unpredictability isn't always a good thing. While the first season saw most of the story consumed by choking deserts and religious allegories to Adam and Eve, the second season picks up some time after the events at the end of season 1. The family has been moved across to the tropical zone, ruled by an atheistic group called the Trust. Gone are the barren, choked deserts, and instead we get acid seas, because reasons? And plenty of crazy flora and fauna. When Mother reawakens after being found out in the wilderness, she soon joins the colony, but finds herself conflicted thanks to the ever-present threat of the serpent, or Number 7, as she affectionately refers to it. Meanwhile, Marcus lurks on the periphery of this colony, sporting new mysterious powers and dead set on establishing a soul-focused church for those disillusioned with the Trust. As the season progresses, these two stories inevitably intersect and interweave together, but there's always a niggling feeling that the writers are just fumbling through the narrative to try and find a hook. Characters twist and turn their allegiances, there are some pretty random subplots thrown in that aren't that satisfying, and an abundance of weirdness that, while welcome, feels like a veil to disguise from some of the plot issues. Raised by Wolves lives and dies by its themes this year, and nowhere else is that more evident than in those aforementioned religious allegories. Some are obvious, the forbidden fruit, while others lean into a more widespread theme of motherhood and what it means to care for one's offspring. These are actually handled quite well, and the show balances these ideas nicely across the 8 episodes. The thing is, Raised by Wolves is so weird, so atmospheric and so unpredictable that you can't help but tune in every week to watch what happens. It's only when you look back and try to work out where the story has gone and why certain elements of the world are the way they are that you realize Raised by Wolves has pulled a proverbial veil over a lot of this. This show has a lot of structural issues, and the plot doesn't always flow as well as it should. Some episodes meander on while others drip-feed answers that spiral into larger questions. But damn, this is still good TV despite those problems, and the sheer weirdness of it all is enough to at least give it a watch as something unique and different in the vast TV landscape. It's not perfect, but it is compelling. Episode 1 of Raised by Wolves Season 2 begins with atheist soldiers finding Mother, Lamia, smothered under a thin layer of leaves. They contemplate what to do with her, eventually settling on moving her to their colony. Some time has passed since the first season, where the finale saw Mother wrestle with pregnancy and eventually give birth to a nightmarish flying eel. If you may also recall, this was hinted at being responsible for Mother's programming and computer virus woes. Anyway, Mother isn't the only one found, as Father too is brought to HQ. As the colonists begin to do an autopsy on Mother, they soon realize that the android isn't a service model and are quickly dealt with. Mother's objective here is to find her children. 3,000 miles from the tropical zone, we catch up with a freezing Marcus, who shivers by the rock outposts while snow swirls around him. After being attacked by a ship and thwarting the threat, Marcus hijacks the bomber and heads for the mothership, which is no longer in flight. Despite crash landing in the acidic water, Marcus manages to make it to safety and proceeds on foot. Marcus soon comes across a cave and proceeds in, dropping to his knees and clutching his necklace upon seeing the familiar sigil of the sun up on the wall. It's a sign from Soul, and interestingly, this spot is precisely where sunlight filters through a gap in the cave. Marcus ventures out and sets to work trying to convert atheists into believers of Soul. Strapped with explosive devices on their chests, Marcus manages to save both Decima and Vril from a nasty fate. He encourages them both to follow him, leading the pair away from the blast site, given one of their trio meets a rather sticky end just prior to this, exploding in front of them. Meanwhile, Mother and Father both join together and rejoice that their mission isn't a failure. They're soon joined by Campion, who greets them both. The rest of the kids are here too, although when they ask about Number 7, Mother lies and claims it died. Father's confused look is an interesting tidbit to note. Father is apparently no longer angry toward mother, especially if their chat soon after is anything to go by, but there are definite hostilities between them still. However, he decides not to rock the boat, with mother promising to do her best to make it up to him. Alongside their children, mother and father soon get into the swing of things, embracing this new socialist community. Each day the colonists are given a new task, with father and the kids given the same role collecting food. For mother, however, she's told to report to Tarantula and see Marcella. Her job is to teach the children of the community, going under her Lamia name. She shows up with a whole bunch of eggs, encouraging them all to paint. When one among them paints a snake, mother interprets it as scary. Interestingly, she's challenged on this idea, with the boy claiming that all living things are beautiful. Meanwhile, father's jovial mood is met with disdainful looks and nasty comments from some in the community. Father shrugs it off, given how bountiful this new world is. We've been less than an hour and nearly filled out bags. But does find a cave opening that intrigues and unnerves him. There are scratch marks up the wall and fractured remnants of what appears to be the skeletal remains of an android. Elsewhere, Marcus is determined to start anew. He intends to use his new companions to start a new order and convert every member of the colony, one at a time if need be. As the episode closes out, a flaming sigil of soul is left outside Mother's house. Episode 2 of Raised by Wolves Season 2 starts with Mother's children debating over who left the sigil on the ground. Mother refuses to use violence though, shrugging off the suggestion of using guns and reinforcing that she's a peaceful android now. Mother's dedication to this cause is soon challenged by the colony. She's given a new task away from teaching the kids. Instead, she's granted the role of Punisher, complete with a menacing mask and metal suit to boot. She's given the unenviable task of hurting Tamerlane, who happens to be the culprit for leaving the soul symbol outside her house. It's something Mother's not particularly happy about, but does so with minimum fuss. Back home, Mother finds Father and admits to what she's done. However, Father is preoccupied himself, having found more pieces from the cave. As suspected, these happen to be fragments of an android and, according to Father, are also radioactive. Anyway, Mother decides to keep what she's done a secret from the kids, especially Campion, whom she's hoping will become a leader there in the future. A battered and bruised Tamerlane soon shows up at Mother's house that night, expressing an apology on behalf of the trust. While Father is all smiles, claiming there's justice in the colony, Campion and the other kids exchange worried glances. Tamerlane's beating causes him to grow disillusioned with the colony, and following his beating, decides to join Marcus instead. A cheeky "come with us if you want to live" line is thrown in for good measure here. Seeing the swift justice brought against Tamerlane scares Campion so much he shows Mother the artifact Paul found out in the wilderness. He also shows an egg he found, but Mother encourages him to take it back to its mother. When Campion heads back to the tree, he's stalked by that strange eel Mother gave birth to. It's monstrously big, much larger than when we left it, and the two exchange a prolonged uncomfortable look. Mother does eventually show up, with her forcing the eel to leave. Mother's stomach begins to leak white liquid, the same place where the eel suckled on her originally. As the eel flies into the colony, it dives into the acidic ocean and with it, latches onto a military station and drags it into the water. With 9 casualties, one of which a child, and a very worried colony, the Trust brief everyone the following day. They've decided to launch a mass hunting trip to find the monster and kill it. But will Mother be able to do that, given the creature is technically her own child? We shall see. For now, she tasks Sue with sealing up her wounds and decides to go after the creature and kill it herself, armed with a monstrously large gun for company. Given her history, Mother deduces that she can do far more damage on her own away from the colony. Father, however, decides to use the Mithraic captives as bait in his own campaign. While this is going on, Marcus decides to sabotage the colony. Tamerlane offers himself up to disrupt the tank heading out, while Marcus joins him as they kill the soldiers inside. All except a guy called Santos, who Marcus tries to talk around. Unfortunately, he tries to shoot Marcus, leading him to think quickly and shoot first. Marcus isn't happy, wanting to convert not kill these souls, but takes the time to praise Santos for Sol as the soldier passes away. When Decima catches wind of what the soldiers were hunting, the monstrous biotech eel, she sees it as a sign and believes she needs to hunt this herself. Vril, meanwhile, is injured in the ensuing skirmish and runs into Campion, who agrees to take her home. As the episode closes out, Mother stumbles upon the shed skin of the eel and makes up her mind. This monstrous eel is a killer of children and as such, deserves death. She burns the skin and continues. Episode 3 of Raised by Wolves Season 2 starts with Mother on the hunt for the giant flying serpent. With an enormous gun strapped to her back, she ventures across the great expanse. Only, she winds up running into Father and his band of sacrificial lambs. Father urges her not to take any unnecessary risks, pointing out that the children, and himself, care deeply for her. After contemplating these words, the pair go their separate ways in search of the creature. They're not alone, though. Marcus and his new believers are also on the hunt, having commandeered a tank and sending out a piercing sound wave to try and lure the serpent in. As fate would have it, it's Father who's lured in. Marcus stops the tank and stands before him, seeing the believers, and urging him to let them go. Marcus tries to encourage him to turn onto their side, but instead Father knocks him down. That's an emphatic no then. Marcus isn't the same man he once was, and he manages to get back up and knock Father down, piercing his skull with the spear Father was carrying, and managing to bring in the sacrifices as his new band of Mithraics. Marcus's ranks are growing, although Lucius spits in Marcus's face and refuses to join him. Paul and Campion arrive at the cave with Vril, where they find the Sigil of Sol, and realize that she's part of Marcus's group. Paul is concerned and urges Campion, in vain, not to tell Vril anything. When Marcus and his group return, the two children hide behind a rock. Meanwhile, Mother runs into the Trust, who aren't best pleased with her destroying their trap. She believes the serpent is atop the mountain and intends to go up there and kill it. Interestingly, the soldiers intending to get her into trouble are given instructions from HQ to head up and join her. It's a tough climb, but the visuals are absolutely breathtaking. Mother eventually heads up alone during the toughest vertical ascent, and she eventually makes it to the summit. When Mother finally comes face to face with the creature, she drops the gun and kills a nearby bird, offering it up as a sacrifice to the serpent. It turns out the creature is actually a herbivore and not lusting for blood after all. While this is going on, Father is brought back from the brink by his children. It turns out Mother has decided not to kill the creature after all and is keeping it safe in a cave nearby. Interestingly, it appears something else killed the colonists. When the Trust find out, they're not exactly happy. Father too is equally displeased and confronts Mother about her choice. Well, it turns out the creature can withstand the acidic water, given its scales and biology, so it seems like there's something else that killed the colonists. The serpent was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. Father likens it to a parasite, but Mother urges him to see her way of thinking. Remember that strange corpse Father found last episode? Well, he's managed to bring the bones together to form a skeletal outline and starts using his own fluid to bring it back from the brink. For Father, he sees this as a way of giving life, and it seems to work too. Throughout the episode, this strange skeleton slowly starts to reform, and Father continues to use fuel and fix it up to how it was before. On his quest for fuel, Father winds up fighting in a battle arena against a guy called Billy. This happens to be an industrial who's an elusive and dangerous fighting machine. With a chainsaw attached to one arm and a minigun on the other, it seems like a rather unfair fight. That is, until Father uses his ingenuity to destroy the android and win the fight. Cheers all round. Father bathes in the adoration of the crowd, while also bagging himself a good deal of fuel too. Meanwhile, Paul is interrogated by the Trust, with the strange orb showing up and echoing his voice across the room. Paul confirms he still wants Marcus dead. As he's shown his mouse, Paul is urged to speak the truth. Interestingly, Paul lies and claims he hasn't had contact with Marcus. It seems to work, as the Trust confirms that there's a search and destroy mission due to take place in less than 24 hours' time. However, Paul's mouse begins acting a little strangely, and it's theorized that it may well have a brain chip installed in it. The kids are soon given their tasks in the morning, but Paul is not in the mood for working. He warns Campion and Holly about the onslaught coming Marcus's way and believes they should warn Vril. From afar, they watch Marcus's kindness as he hands out fruit. Paul is spotted by Marcus, though, and encourages the kids to join them. As they do, the camera pans over to show the sun beaming into the camera lens while shadowing Marcus's face, a beautifully eerie way to end the Episode 4 of Raised by Wolves Season 2 begins with Marcus thanking Paul for coming to warn them. Paul's faith is clearly wavering, and he calls out Sue for being an atheist and how she's beyond redemption. As he steps up, though, strange particles lift from the bag, and he immediately starts breaking out into hives. It turns out the Trust have actually put a bio-bomb in his mouse, which explains what's happening. Marcus brings Paul outside and under Soul's light, trying to save him from the infection which continues to spread. Eventually, Paul loses consciousness. Marcus realizes the real fight was actually this cowardly chemical attack, with the mouse used to try and wipe them all out. Marcus encourages the others to keep the faith, deciding to move them all away while he stays with Paul, intending to pray to Soul for help. Campion is convinced that Mother wasn't part of this and hurries off back to the Trust. Decima follows, with orders to bring him back. She's then followed too to make sure she follows protocol. Meanwhile, Father uses his newly won fuel to try and bring the android he's working on to life. Despite dousing the skeletal remains in fuel, it doesn't seem to make any difference. That is, until Father leaves. In his absence, the fuel is absorbed. Out by the lake, Decima catches up with Campion. Only, she's grabbed and pulled into the acidic water by a strange creature. Thankfully, Campion manages to save her, bashing this strange creature in the head with a rock. However, Campion is soon shot at and forced to flee straight back into camp, where he tells Mother about Paul's sickness. Unfortunately, in the process of this, Decima is seen as not following direct orders and forced to pay for it. The other believers hold her down as Vril slashes at her wildly. In doing so, she takes off a layer of skin to reveal the cold synthetic remains of the android underneath. As Decima jumps off the cliff, Vril watches in stunned silence. Mother shows up to see Paul and decides to take him back to the Trust. Marcus is having none of that, though, encouraging her to back off given he needs prayer. As the two inevitably skirmish, Mother comes out victorious and realizes Marcus has her necro eyes in his stomach. After extracting them, she replaces her real eyes and scoops up Campion, turning back into her necromancer form and heading to the Trust. They're given orders to shoot to destroy, but of course, with Mother's eyes back, she's fully weaponized. Mother thwarts their threat, brushing off the soldiers and forcing them to open the doors. With the collective's algorithm fixed and allegedly no antidote for this infection, Mother regrettably shuts the great machine down, plunging the central core into darkness. The thing is, this causes absolute chaos as the Trust are fractured and unsure what to do. Mother tries to step up as leader, at least until another human leader is chosen anyway, but that too falls on deaf ears. Some of the crowd murmur discontent, refusing to follow another machine and walk away. In camp, Father heads back into the shed and finds the strange skeletal remains gone. Father believes that Mother has taken it away until he opens the doors and stares upon the brilliant orange light of this humanoid creature. Episode 5 Recap. The episode begins as Father regains his functions. In Episode 4, he encounters the ancient android awakened because of him. There is an interestingly intimate moment in Episode 5 between these two androids. She laughs at his joke, and he decides to remove the veil that seems to be a part of her design. However, before he does, Mother calls for him. After taking out the Trust, Mother is the new leader of the fragmented atheist settlement. Holly has left a message for her and Father before joining Marcus and his followers. She dubs them her kidnappers, which they are, and tells them that she is now with her people, asking them not to try to find her. However, unlike Holly, Mother knows that Marcus doesn't have any mystic powers, so he will not be able to protect one of her children against the dangers of Kepler 22b. As a result, she sends Father to get Holly back. In turn, Father makes a deal with Lucius. If the Mithraic helps him retrieve Holly, he can do anything to Marcus and his followers. Episode 6 of Raised by Wolves Season 2 sees Campion try to establish himself as a leader among the workers. However, he struggles to get his words out, stuttering and fumbling as his confidence betrays him. Sadly, even his joke doesn't land either. Meanwhile, Mother joins up with Sue as they conduct a baby scan on Tempest. It turns out her pregnancy is moving along faster than anticipated. Specifically, she's going to give birth the next day. She's worried and starts to panic, but Mother offers to look after the child for her until she's ready, which she vehemently declines. With Mother now in charge of the colony, the murderer Marcus is brought before her. It's worth noting that just prior to this, Lucius found a metal card in his shoe. Anyway, Mother tells Marcus to renounce Soul and tell everyone that this is a fantasy. In exchange, she'll set him free. Despite Paul rushing up and hugging him, Marcus does no such thing, challenging her authority and promising that he has faith, something a robot can never have. Father heads in to see the ancient android, which speaks Old Mithraic after Campion touches its hand. It turns out this is the light that Campion saw. It wasn't Soul after all. However, Mother figures out where Campion is and catches them both with the android. Campion reveals he's called this android Grandmother because it's very old. Mother believes she's dangerous and turns into her necro form, intending to stop the creature in case it attacks them. Mother is distrusting, but when the android passes out, Father reveals exactly how he grew this android. He also repeats the ancient Mithraic tongue the creature uttered, which Mother just so happens to translate. Apparently it asks Father, "Why aren't you wearing your veil?" Mother and Father continue to disagree over whether this creature is harmful, as they run more tests together. It would appear that instead of a weapon system, the ancient android has something else going on. Mother is concerned and decides to keep the kids away from her until they can determine exactly what she is. That night, the eel starts screaming, prompting Campion to head inside its cage and try to calm it down. The thing is, this happens to be as a direct consequence of Sue messing about with the ancient box outside. While she and Paul blasted with lasers, this seems to upset the eel, and that explains why it's been screaming. Sue makes her choice and frees Marcus from his cell. Before he goes, he speaks of the tree and eventually leaves the settlement, where Paul happens to be waiting for them by the side of the acidic lake. Another character out in the open is Tempest, who ends up giving birth by the sea. She actually bites off the umbilical cord too, given how sudden the labor is. Unfortunately, the cries from the babe bring a strange creature out from the lake, dripping in acid. It snatches up her babe, seemingly consuming it inside itself and diving back into the lake. Tempest is understandably distraught and begins screaming and crying. Mother reflects on what's happened to when Tempest is brought back. She's concerned that they've all become too human for their own good, and that's why this occurred. However, when she finds out Sue and Paul have gone, she has no words. Well, the trio happen to be outside, and as night draws on, Paul has Sue sing her a lullaby. In doing so, this actually opens the box, where Sue finds a seed inside. When she touches it, it seems to absorb inside her, and she stumbles away. Possessed, she begins digging with her bare hands, eventually screaming to the heavens. When Paul awakens, he finds the box open and in the distance, blocking the sunlight, a large monstrous tree. Paul wakes Marcus up, who marvels at its sight. But where is Sue? Is she dead? Marcus finds a seed on the floor, and after opening up its hard shell, takes a bite. In doing so, he notices the tree pulsating. As tears fill his eyes, he drops to his knees and reaches. Episode 7 of Raised by Wolves Season 2 starts with Paul hauling back numerous fruit from the new tree. Paul claims it's from Sector 7, but of course this is from the tree Sue turned into last episode. As the tribe members gather and begin collecting it up, trying what's inside, Paul turns away and hurries back to Marcus. He's convinced that this fruit is going to help people see the light and come around to their way of thinking. Meanwhile, Father catches up with the other children. They've modified a D7 surveillance drone to head under the acid lake, but there's an unexpected surprise in store for them. One of these creatures has been captured and killed. Tempest takes a knife and begins digging into its flesh, desperate to see if the baby is inside. It's not, as it turns out, and the drone's signal is soon lost after a brief stint underwater. However, Vril happens to pick up the drone by the shore, having got herself back to working order, although she happens to sport a mask over her face. When the others see her, Vril reassures them, claiming her earlier bout of violence was simply self-defense, but the kids aren't so sure. Interestingly, she has seen Tempest's baby, which is still alive. According to Vril, it's located in a sea cave 10 miles downshore. Mother flies across and notices the tree, immediately touching it and realizing it's linked to Sue. She exhibits concerns and flies back, telling the other colonists not to eat the fruit. After all, it could be poisoned. However, mighty banging culminates in the great serpent breaking free from its cage and flying through the air toward the tree. As it flies, a radio signal crackles through on Marcus's radio, who happens to be there with Paul. Two words bleed through: "Burn me." This seems to be Sue reaching out, and as the branches extend, the serpent swoops down and eats the tree, evolving further by sprouting monstrous tendrils across its body. Mother flies up and uses her powers against the serpent, but it doesn't work. In fact, the serpent uses powers of its own to send Mother spinning and straight into the ground. As the serpent flies off, Paul and Marcus decide to take an unconscious Mother to the habitant to recover. Unfortunately, she was unable to kill the serpent because of her programming. It's misidentified the serpent as a child as she gave birth to it, and as such, she's unable to launch any sort of offense. So the only way to solve this is for Mother to be reprogrammed, with Father and the ancient Mithraic android, the potential key to resolving this. Mother heads in to see the ancient android, who's hooked up to numerous tubes. Grandmother happens to be a shepherd, an android created by the technocrats to fight against the believers in the war. Her prime directive is to protect human beings no matter what. The shepherd theorizes that she could remove her veil and place it on Mother, potentially blocking her caregiving protocols. Out in the wild, Father, Tempest and the others find the sea creature with Tempest's baby. Only it's docile. In fact, she finds it feeding her child. Tempest forces them to stand down and not shoot. Tempest decides that the choice has already been made for them, believing that there's no way she can love the child. As she turns and walks away, Hunter shoots the creature anyway and takes the baby back. She tries to hand it to Tempest, but she simply walks away. With Vril's spine giving up, the android realizes that she's about to be signed out as her and Campion walk through the woods together. With her about to be shut down permanently, Vril scribbles down a bunch of instructions on a tree branch before collapsing. In the spectacular Season 2 finale of Raised by Wolves, faith and science converge, and certain revelations are made. Mother Lamia, Amanda Collin, goes hunting for the serpent, while grandmother, Selena Jones, helps Father, Abubaker Salam, with the children. It is revealed that Tempest's baby now has abnormal mutations due to her exposure to the sea creature. After what happened to Sue, Marcus Travis Fimmel finds a new purpose in pursuing vengeance against the entity. A new religion seems to emerge in the atheist community. Here is everything you need to know about the ending of the Raised by Wolves Season 2 finale. Raised by Wolves Season 2 finale recap. Season 2 finale, titled Happiness, begins as Campion copies a part of the inscription that Vril left behind on a piece of cloth before burying her. Having been raised by two androids, his view of them is significantly different from any other person in the collective, including his 5 siblings. He was very much aware that Vril wasn't a human and still fell in love with her. It is becoming increasingly apparent that if Campion does become a leader like Mother hopes or the savior from the Mithraic prophecies, it will probably be of the androids. Vril's inscription is supposed to be Vril's original thoughts, which Paul later claims are ramblings about Earth. During their previous encounter, Mother couldn't kill the serpent because of her caregiving programming. In this episode, she puts on grandmother's veil and goes after the serpent, which is more interested in chasing after Campion than destroying humanity even after becoming weaponized. They fly beyond the atmosphere before Mother grabs it by the tentacles and hits with the deadly necromancer sound blast. Tempest deals with past trauma and inner turmoil after she and Hunter bring her child to the collective, where they discover that she has non-human mutations. Hunter deduces that this is because of the sea creature's milk that the baby consumed. She is then put through corrective surgery. Meanwhile, someone steals the Punisher helmet, one of the Mithraic relics from the tarantula. Initially, Marcus is the main suspect. But toward the end of the episode, it is revealed that Lucius Macius Varela was the one who took the mask. He can now hear the voice or the signal from the entity. So Raised by Wolves bows out its second season with an agonizing cliffhanger that doesn't really explain very much, one that seems to hint that Marcus has powers after all. Quite how these have manifested and why, though, is rife for speculation. Mother's fate is also left hanging in the balance, while grandmother seems to be trying to devolve the children for reasons currently unknown. It would seem that mother taking the veil has been grandmother's plan all along, and without her veil on anymore, her true intentions appear to lie with taking over her role as caregiver. This would also explain why she took a fancy to father too. The whole of the second season has largely tackled the serpent and how this ties into our characters, and in that respect, there's been a good deal of work done to keep this thematically intact. Plot-wise though, there's been a lot of weird and wonderful twists, and while not all of them have worked, it does feel a lot more consistent compared to the first season. With no word on season 3 just yet though, everything is left wide open for where this one may turn next. Given the number of question marks hanging over this show, let's hope we get an answer sooner rather than later.